Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 We'll start with the 10th chapter of second canto, the cosmic manifestation. And this 10th chapter is titled Bhagavatam is the answer to all questions. And there were several questions which are asked in the 8th chapter by Parikshit Maharaj. So here Shukdev Goswami starts speaking, answering few of the questions from here. And as we discussed when we were discussing 8th chapter, that the answers to those questions are spread across Srimad Bhagavatam. But here specifically, it's what is there in Srimad Bhagavatam and what is going to be discussed. Okay. So we'll see the breakup. The first 7 verses will list the 10 subject matters of Srimad Bhagavatam, which are the subject matters of the Mahapuranas. Okay. And here, one important aspect that we will see is that all of these 10 are with respect to the Supreme Lord, in relation to the Supreme Lord. In other Mahapuranas, it would not be so. Okay, they would be independent of their relationship with the Supreme Lord. That is why they are categorized under different modes. Okay, but here, although the same 10 topics, the characteristics of a Mahapurana, these 10 topics are being discussed, but they are in relation to the Supreme Lord. Okay, so that is why they are, Bhagavatam is the answer for all questions, answer to all questions, because it's what is discussed in Srimad Bhagavatam. 8 and 9 text will speak how the living entity is specifically dependent on the Ashraya. And from 10 to 35, the elements of creation are all dependent on the independent Supreme Lord. Okay. So, in the 23rd text of the 5th chapter, we saw that everything, all the living entities and everything is made up of the modes, but the Supreme Lord is transcendental to all of them and He is the Supreme Controller. So this principle of the Supreme Lord's control over His complete creation is what is being stressed. So even when we read Srila Prabhupada's purport, at multiple places He will tell or He will stress this point that the Supreme Lord is completely independent and He is the Supreme Controller. Okay, so which basically gives an idea that although this whole creation is there, but still it's only to the Supreme Lord that one should surrender to, one should render devotional service to. So that is the focus of this chapter. Shukdev Goswami is trying to bring focus to this particular point through answering Parikshit Maharaj's question of the universal form. Okay. If you remember, in the 8th chapter, Parikshit Maharaj asked again about the universal form, how the universal form is, or how the universal, explain more about the universal form basically. We will see that verse also when we come to that section. So this is an answer to that. Shukdev Goswami's answer to that particular question of the universal form, how the creation is manifested from the universal form. So while explaining about the creation being manifested in the universal form, it is stressed that because they are manifested from the universal form, therefore everything is dependent on the Supreme Lord. Okay, so this is from 8 to 35. 36 to 47 is where the Lord is claimed or is established as the creator, maintainer and destroyer in His different forms. So He is the ultimate creator. He is ultimately maintaining everybody. And finally, He is the one who is responsible for destruction also, which He achieves through His different forms. Creation He achieves through the form of Lord Brahma. Maintenance He does in the form of Kshirodakshayi Vishnu. And destruction He does in the form of the Rudras. Okay, so it is actually the Lord who is doing all these 3 things, but through His different forms. So therefore, everything is dependent on Him. The whole, material world, when we speak about the material world, it's creation, destruction and maintenance. Okay, these 3 comprises the material world. There's nothing else to it. Okay, and then the living entity try to fulfill their desires within these gaps. There's creation to fulfill the desire, and there's maintenance where they can try to fulfill their desires, and ultimately they are destroyed, and again to fulfill their desires they are created again. So material world's nature itself is creation, destruction, and maintenance. Okay, this is what it is. But the cause of all is the Lord, who accomplishes these three things within the material world by his different forms. So the chapter ends there from 1 to 47. 48 to 51 is where Shaunaka Rishi desires to hear the conversation between Maitreya Rishi and Vidura. And this will enable Shukdev Goswami, or this will lead to the third canto, where Maitreya Rishi answers. Vidura's questions would be there, and Maitreya Rishi would answer those questions. Okay. And this conversation actually came in the first canto. In the first canto, I think 13th chapter, when Vidura left for pilgrimage after he was insulted by Duryodhana, correct? And then it is said that he met Maitreya Rishi, and then he gained transcendental knowledge from him, right? And then he comes back after the war is complete to give good counsel to Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra quits home. Right? That's the 13th chapter, I think, right? So Vidura comes back after receiving instructions from Maitreya Rishi. So Shaunaka Rishi is asking, what are those instructions which Vidura gained from Maitreya Rishi? Please discuss about that. You mentioned it some time back. So please discuss about it. So that we'll discuss in the third canto. And in the third canto, the answers to Parikshit Maharaj's questions will also come, will also follow. Because subject matter is same, only the speaker would be different. Okay, the speaker would be Maitreya Rishi, the recipient would be Vidura. The questions will be those of Parikshit Maharaj. And Shukdev Goswami is giving the answer, quoting the conversation between Maitreya and Vidura. So it's not like they are talking about a completely different subject matter. They are talking about the same subject matter, which also answer the questions of Parikshit Maharaj, which he asked in the 8th chapter of this canto. Right? Are you able to follow? Okay, so this is how it is. Yes, it's just like this, no? When Parikshit Maharaj asked a question in the 3rd chapter, in the 4th chapter of this canto, Shukdev Goswami replies by reciting the narration between Lord Brahma and Narada, your 5th, 6th and 7th chapter. And then again Parikshit Maharaj asks questions and Shukdev Goswami responds. And now he is going to quote the conversation between Maitreya Rishi and Vidura. So although the inspiration comes from Shaunaka Rishi and Suta Goswami is speaking to Shaunaka Rishi, this conversation was also recited by Shukdev Goswami to Maharaj Parikshit. Okay, so that's why in 3rd canto we will not see Suta Uvacha. Actually, when the response comes, it comes from Shukdeva Uvacha only. Shuka Uvacha. Shukdev Goswami only speaks the conversation between Maitreya and Vidura. We'll get to that. Focus on this chapter will be only 2. First section would be your 10 topics of Srimad Bhagavatam, the 10 subject matters. And then the creation done by the universal form of the Lord. Okay, which will basically be these 3 principles, Adhibhuta, Adideva and Adhyatma. So we'll get to that when we come to the 8th verse. We'll probably read the whole purport because it's very important. So we'll get to that. Okay. So first, text 1, it's a famous verse. Shri Shuka Uvacha, Atra Sargo Visargascha, Sthanam Poshanam Utaya, Manvantareshanu Katha, Nirodho Muktir Ashraya. These are the 10 subject matters. There's Sarga, which is creation, and Visarga, which is sub-creation. You see, Shri Shukdev Goswami said in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are 10 divisions of statements regarding the following. The creation of the universe, which is Sarga. There is sub-creation, which is Visarga. Then there is planetary system, which is your Sthanam. Okay, how they are situated. How are the planetary system situated? Protection by the Lord, this is Poshanam. Then the creative impetus, this is Uti. The change of Manus is your Manvantara. The science of God, Ishanukatha. Returning home is your Nirodha. Returning home back to God, it is Nirodha. Liberation is Mukti. Okay, actually Nirodha is defined in a different way by Prabhupada himself in the later verses. And Ashraya is the supreme shelter, the Samambhuna. So, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, in this chapter, the 10 subject matters of Bhagavatam are described, starting with creation and sub-creation. The divisions of Adhyatma, Adibhuta and Adideva are also described. So, these are the 2 topics, primary topics in the 10th chapter. To isolate the transcendence of the samam bunam, the symptoms of the rest are described sometimes by Vedic evidence, sometimes by direct explanation, and sometimes by summary explanations given by the great sages. Okay, so Vishwanath Chakravarti says the great devotees such as Vidura and Maitreya describe properly the 9 topics in order to impart the highest knowledge of the 10th topic through the words of the scripture and stories to illustrate their meaning. So, of the 10 subject matters, the 9 subject matters which are there basically are there to support or describe the 10th subject matter. So, they are isolated in that way. Okay. Each of these 9 topics are referring to the supreme shelter, to the samam bonam, to the ashraya. Okay, so creation is with respect to the Lord, subcreation is with respect to the Lord, situation of the living entities, sthanam is with respect to the Lord, poshanam, protection of the living entities is with respect to the Lord. That's why we have different narrations within Bhagavatam which can be classified into these 9 topics. But all of them will always go back to the Supreme Lord. Dhruva's narration, Prayag Maharaj's narration, and so many other narrations are there in Bhagavatam. And all of them finally go back to the Supreme Lord. Even, there are so many, we'll see in the 4th canto also, when this Daksha Yajna happens, or when Lord Shiva is giving instructions to the Prachetas. And all these things, ultimately it is taken back to the Supreme Lord. The connection brings back to the ultimate shelter, the Supreme Shelter. Although these personalities will be glorified, but ultimately they are connected back to the Supreme Shelter, to the Samam Bunam. Okay. So these 9 are for supporting the 10th one. That's why they are classified, they are categorized to isolate the transcendence of the Samam Bunam. Okay, without the ashraya, the other 9 activities will be mundane. Okay, but only when they are in connection with the 10th topic, then they become transcendental. So that's why it's said it's isolated that way. So they are described by Vedic evidence, by Shrutena, Arthena and Anjasa. By Vedic evidences or by direct explanation of the topics are summarized. Now from 3rd to 7th text, Shukdev Goswami will explain a little bit about these 10 topics. Okay, and he says the elementary creation of 16 items of matter, namely the 5 elements fire, water, earth, air and sky, sound, form, taste, smell and touch, and the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, skin and mind is known as Sarga. The creation of these elements. This we have discussed in your previous chapters, in chapter 6 and 7. Right? Yeah, 6 and 7. And whereas subsequent resultant interaction of the modes of material nature is called Visarga. Okay, so these elements are created, and when they are brought together by the modes of nature, then that resultant interaction is called as Visarga, or the creation which is done by Lord Brahma. So this can be understood just like we see our eyes. Okay, our eyes is there, our nose, our senses are there. For the different species of life, eyes work in different way. All the principally they are meant to see, but the potency of different species of life with respect to the eye is different. So their sense power is different based on the different species of life, which are in turn related to the modes of nature. So that's why when Shukdev Goswami says that the subsequent resultant interaction of the modes of material nature is called Visarga, although these principal elements are there, but they are combined based on the modes to give specific potencies which different species of life have with respect to their sensory activities. Are you able to understand? Okay. So Srila Prabhupada writes, to explain the 10 divisional symptoms, there are 7 continuous verses. Okay. And the subsequent creation is the result of the reactions of the above mentioned 16 energies of the first Purusha, the Mahavishnu, who is an incarnation of Govinda. And he quotes this verse from Brahma Samhita. And one must refer to the Vedic conclusions to understand how the creation is made possible. The creation appears to be a product of material nature, but actually this is not so. Okay, the creation is not a product of material nature. The creation is made from the Supreme Lord. Okay. So this conclusion comes from a poor fund of knowledge. From Vedic reference, it's concluded that the origin of all energies is the Supreme Lord. And how these three different energies interact with each other, bring about this manifestation, is what forms the subject matter of this particular canto. You can say at least the last 7 chapters we have been discussing this principle. Sarga means the manifestation of elements, tanmatra, senses, ahankara and mahatattva, and as well as the description in the universal form caused when the Lord creates transformation of the gunas. We have discussed all this, and we are going to discuss this in the 10th chapter also. So even the 10th chapter what we are going to discuss is Sarga, a part of Sarga only. We will not see the creation from Brahma here. That will come in the 3rd canto. We are going to see the Sarga principle which continues here. Visarga refers to the creation of moving and non-moving entities by Brahma. Creation of the jivas means giving jivas forms with intelligence, senses and body for engaging in material enjoyment, pursuing liberation or practicing bhakti according to their qualifications. So this is Visarga, where the body is given to the living entities. The living entities are not created during Visarga. So creation of the body does not mean the living entities are created, but the living entities are eternal. They are given suitable bodies by Lord Brahma. The right situation for the living entities is to obey the laws of the Lord and thus be in perfect peace of mind under the protection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The manus and their laws are meant to give right direction in life. The impetus for activity is the desire for fruitive work. So this is explaining the 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, you have sthanam. Okay, the right situation, sthitihi is mentioned, which is basically same as sthanam. So the right situation for the living entities is to obey the laws of the Lord. So you see, each of these 10 topics or each of these 9 topics are in relation to the Supreme Lord. Okay, so sthanam does not mean that you only follow your varna and ashram principles. Sthanam means that the living entity is supposed to obey the laws of the Lord. It's in connection with the Lord. And poshanam, the maintenance, is to be in perfect peace under the protection of the Supreme Lord. So one can be in peace only when he is under the protection of the Lord, when he has that consciousness. So proper maintenance of his self in the material world, poshanam, is possible in relation to the Lord. Then the manus and their laws are meant to give right direction in life. So the right direction in life is to fulfill the purpose of creation. So the Manvantara Katha is meant for that purpose. The reins of the Manu is meant for that purpose. So that is why we have this Manu Samhita. So Manu Samhita, even the injunctions in the Manu Samhita are actually supposed to be followed so that one can lead a religious life and ultimately do that as a service to Krishna. The impetus for activity is the desire for fruitive work. Okay. So this is what it is. Thitir Vaikuntha Vijaya. Vaikuntha Vijaya means the victory of the Lord of Vaikuntha, which is to obey the laws of the Lord. Prabhupada writes here. Poshnam is Tad Anugraha, his mercy. Manvantarani Sad Dharma, to follow the Sad Dharma, the perfect occupation duty. That is why we should discuss the reins of the Manu. That is why in Srimad Bhagavatam these 10 topics are discussed, because they are in relation to the Lord. Then Utayaha Karma Vasanaha. So this we will see. Why Utayaha Karma Vasanaha? Now this does not seem to have any relation with the Lord, but this is also mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam so that people can understand how they can get implicated by activities, by their activities. Good activities, pious activities, impious activities, but different types of association, how they are impacted. Okay. And then how they should not be impacted by that, they should come out of it. So this is again in relation to the Lord. So you just read this commentary by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, where he gives for these 4. Sthiti also refers to the condition of the jivas, he says. Or Vaikuntha Vijaya can mean that the Lord destroys the suffering of the jiva. Since Jaya means victory over. After the creation, the condition of the jiva is described. In protecting the jivas, the Lord shows his mercy to some. The devotees performing sadhana, even if they are involved in any sin by accident, this is the meaning of Poshanam. The Lord protects by his mercy. Manvantara refers to the religious conduct of the kings, reigning during the Manvantara, revealed through narratives concerning them. So religious conduct of the kings with relation to the Lord. Uti refers to the impressions produced by action, those things which are accomplished by actions. It refers to the impressions arising from actions either low or high. Pious or impious acts become the cause of future happiness and distress. So through Uti, a philosophical discussion is presented in Srimad Bhagavatam to make one understand the consequences of action, good or bad, in this material world. So this impetus for activity and desire for fruitive activity, what are the consequences of those activities, good or bad, in this material world, and how one should transcend that. So those topics which we discuss with this particular principle, they are called as Uti. Then we have the science of God, describes the incarnations of the personality of Godhead and his different activities, together with the activities of his great devotees. So this is your Isha Katha. Okay, Isha Katha is the incarnations of the Lord is described along with his activities and the activities of his great devotees also. Okay. So Srila Prabhupada writes that history and narrations of the personality of Godhead is what people should hear. They should not hear mundane history and mundane narration of different men and times. Due to a lack of knowledge in the science of Godhead, they are not apt to study the history of the incarnation of the personality of Godhead. It should always be remembered that the material creation is created for the salvation of the conditioned soul. So this is one of the principal themes, we can say, which comes up in this canto again and again, where Srila Prabhupada writes that the material creation is created for the salvation of the conditioned soul. That is the purpose. And from the second canto, if we can derive this one principle and imbibe that in our life, then we can say that we have studied the second canto properly. Because our whole life is meant to fulfill the purpose of the Lord. And because we are in this creation, we are meant to fulfill the purpose of this creation, which is to render devotional service to the Lord. So this point comes back again and again. Okay. And in this particular chapter also it will come. So Srimad Bhagavatam offers such transcendental topics of the Lord in relationship with great devotees. The merging of the living entity along with his conditional living tendency with the mystic lying down of the Mahavishnu is called the binding up of the cosmic manifestation. So this is Nirodha. Okay. So here Nirodha is differently defined than how it was defined in the first text, where it means Nirodha means going back home, back to Godhead. But here it's done because liberation is also defined here, so the distinction is made. Prabhupada discusses that in the purport. We'll read that. So the merging of the living entity along with the conditional living tendency with the mystic lying down of the Mahavishnu is called the winding up of the cosmic manifestation, where the living entity is not purified, so he merges either in Garbhodakshaya Vishnu during the manifestation of this universe or ultimately with Mahavishnu. So even though he is merging with the Supreme Lord, still he maintains his individuality and he has his conditioned tendency also to enjoy separately from the Lord. So he is not liberated at that point. So therefore there is a distinction between Nirodha and liberation. Liberation is when Muktir Hitva Nitharupam Swarupena Vyavasthitihi. This is liberation. Okay. So Muktir Hitva Anyatharupam. A conditioned living entity wants to enjoy in different forms of life. Either as a dog, either as a hog, as a cat, as an insect, as a mosquito, and so many different species of life. He has a tendency to enjoy. Okay. But Mukti basically means he has no tendency to enjoy any other form. Hitva, he has given up his desire to enjoy in any other form. Anyatha, Rupam. Swarupena Vyavasthiti, and he situates himself in his individual own Swarupa, in his self. That is called as liberation. Right? So Muktir Hitva Anyatha Rupam. In Mukti, you give up all Anyatha, all other Rupa, all other forms, and situate yourself in your original transcendental form, constitutional form. That is called as Mukti. But Nirodha is different from it. Because Nirodha means, although we have given up forms, there is no material form for the living entity, but still he has not given up the desire to enjoy separately from the Lord. So when the next creation happens, starting from Mahavishnu and then to Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, he is bound by the Lord, by the material energy, and he gets repeated bodies again and again. So Nirodha is only the temporary cessation of his material activities is Nirodha. Liberation is permanent cessation from material activities, where he goes back home, back to Godhead. So Nirodha and Mukti is distinguished in that way. Nirodha is temporary, where he has to again get material bodies. Only for specific amount of time, he does not have a material body. But his inclination is there to enjoy separately from the Lord. But liberation is, he is situated in Swarupa. And when one is situated in Swarupa, he does not come back to the material world again. So it's permanent. Liberation is permanent. Nirodha is temporary. So that's why Srila Prabhupada in his purport writes about two kinds of devastation. Okay, and he says, yes, the ever-conditioned souls are apt to develop a mentality of lording it over the material nature, and therefore the material cosmic creation is manifested to give the ever-conditioned souls two kinds of facilities. One facility is that the conditioned soul can act according to his tendency to lording it over the cosmic manifestation. Okay, where he tries to enjoy himself within this material world. Okay, lording it over the cosmic manifestation means controlling and enjoying tendency is there. And other facility gives the conditioned soul a chance to come back to Godhead. Okay, so these are the two kinds of devastation. These are the two kinds of facilities which are given in the material world. The actual purpose for which the Lord creates is to go back and back to Godhead, to render devotional service unto Him. But the living entity thinks that he can enjoy. The facility is also given by the Lord to enjoy within this material world. Although it's not possible to the fullest extent, or to the extent when the living entity desires, the soul, the conditioned soul desires. But still there is some facility to enjoy in this material world. But the purpose is to go back home, back to Godhead. So, after the winding up of the cosmic manifestation, most of the conditioned souls merge into the existence of Mahavishnu, lying in his mystic slumber, to be created again in the next creation. Okay. But some conditioned souls who follow the transcendental sound from the Vedic literatures go back to Godhead, attain their original spiritual bodies, Swarupa, after quitting the conditional gross and subtle body. And the material conditioned body develop because of the living entity's forgetfulness of their relationship with Godhead. And one who can revive his relationship with the Lord, he goes to Krishna. And one who does not revive that relationship, he remains in this material world. Okay. So even the impersonalists, they are also created because they have not revived their relationship with the Lord. They are not situated in this Swarupa. Mukti hitva nitharupa swarupena vyavasthiti. So this we have heard many times from Srila Prabhupada. Whenever he quotes this verse, he says that Mukti basically means to become situated in one's Swarupa. And till that point, everyone, whether it be on the material path or on the so-called spiritual path, the impersonalist also, they have to come back, because they will not get ultimate liberation of going back home, back to Godhead, till they understand that their constitutional position is to render devotional service to Krishna. Till they understand that point, they have to come back again and again. So liberation means this, to be situated in Swarupa. That Srila Prabhupada writes how one can situate himself. Okay, to go back home, back to Godhead is the proper liberation. How can one get liberated? So then the rest of the purport follows the instructions, or these are the instructions that he gives. And he makes this point that the devotional service is transcendental attraction for the Supreme on account of his being the source of all pleasing humors. Everyone is after some pleasure of humor for enjoyment, but does not know the supreme source of all attraction. And the Vedic literatures explain that. So this is the point, this is the basic distinguishing point, why some living entities want to remain in the material world and some living entities want to go back home, back to Godhead. The distinction is that one knows and one does not know how to achieve the supreme happiness, how to attain the highest happiness. Those who remain in the material world, or those who are in the material world, conditioned living entities, or those who want to come back again in the material world, they think that they can get happiness with this material world. So they are in ignorance. They do not have knowledge. But one who gains knowledge, or one who understands that there is no happiness in this material world, he will not want to come back. So this is what distinguishes one. When he engages, after understanding that there is no happiness in the material world, and he engages in devotional service, then there is humor, there is rasa. Because the Supreme Lord, the connection, he is establishing his connection with Krishna, and Krishna is the reservoir of all pleasure. So he gets highest pleasure, even though he is in this material world. So now he does not want to come back to the material world because of this high pleasure. And then he goes back home, back to Godhead that way. So one knows everybody is searching after happiness. The conditioned living entity also, as well as the liberated living entity. But the liberated living entity knows where the highest happiness is. The conditioned living entity does not know it. So he has to take repeated birth and death. He has to take repeated birth again and again. Whereas the liberated living entity goes to the spiritual world. So Nirodha is for those who are ignorant, and liberation is meant for those who are situated in knowledge. Yes, who are knowledgeable. The Supreme One, who is celebrated as the Supreme Being or the Supreme Soul, is the Supreme Source of the cosmic manifestation, as well as its reservoir and winding up. Thus, he is the Supreme Fountainhead, the Absolute Truth. So this is the Ashraya, the Supreme Shelter. He is the Supreme Being. Okay. He is the Supreme Soul. He is the Source, Supreme Source of this whole material cosmic manifestation. He is the one who is sustaining it because he is the reservoir. He is the Ashraya of this whole material manifestation. And he is the one who winds up. He is the source of winding up of the material world also. Okay, so he is the creator, maintainer and destroyer. So that way, he is the supreme fountainhead, the absolute truth. So all these 9 topics which are with respect to this material world, starting from Sarga. We have Sarga, Visarga and all these 9 topics, if we see, they specifically pertain to the activities of this material world. Sarga does not happen in the spiritual world. Okay, Sarga, Visarga does not happen in the spiritual world. Then situation of the living entities within the planetary system, Sthanam, protection by the Lord, obviously it's there. Okay, in the spiritual world also, but then here is specific to the material world. Poshanam, then Manvantara Katha is there, Isha Katha is there, Uti, the impetus to work for fruitive activities, the Nirodha, Mukti, all these things are in relation to the material world, the whole cosmic manifestation. And the Ashraya, the support of all this, is the 10th topic, the Samambuna, the Supreme Shelter. So these 9 topics are sheltered by the Supreme Lord. Because these 9 topics basically discuss the activities within this material world, right from the creation to its winding up. So we see Sarga starts from Sarga and the 8 topics Nirodha, 9 topics liberation. Okay, so then in between that there is maintenance. Sarga Visarga is your creation. Then we have these 4, Sthanam, Poshanam, Manvantara, Ishanukatha and then Uti. So these are all, you can say, part of maintenance. There is Nirodha and liberation, Mukti, which is your destruction part. All of this creation, maintenance, destruction, all this set of 9 are supported by the Supreme Shelter, by the Supreme Lord, the Ashraya, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Okay, so that is how these 10 topics are discussed in Srimad Bhagavatam with relation to the Supreme Lord, because he is the Supreme Shelter. Srila Prabhupada speaks about this Brahman, Paramatma and Bhagavan. So we will skip these because we have already discussed this before. You can read it. And he gives a summary here of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the different cantos. So he says that, thus by general conclusion, Lord Krishna is the ultimate source of all energies, and the word Krishna means that. Okay. And to explain Krishna or the science of Krishna, the Srimad Bhagavatam has been prepared. So this is what we are discussing. The 9 topics are sheltered by Krishna. And Srimad Bhagavatam is basically discussing this. In the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, this truth is indicated in the questions and answers by Suta Goswami and great sages like Shaunaka. And in the first and second chapters of the canto, this is explained. Right? We have questions in the first chapter, second and third chapter, answers. In the third chapter, this subject is more explicit, and the fourth chapter, even more explicit. In the second canto, the absolute truth as the personality of Godhead is further emphasized, and the indication is the Supreme Lord, Krishna. Right? This absolute truth as the personality of Godhead is emphasized in the 5th, 6th and 7th chapter. We discussed that. If you remember, all the topics of universal form were discussed by Lord Brahma, and then finally he says that all these things is actually coming from the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, who cannot be understood very easily, but only his devotees can understand. Right? So this is the thing, the personality of Godhead is further emphasized, that although universal form, the whole cosmic manifestation looks like it has been created from the impersonal form of the Lord, who has taken the universal form for the purpose of creation, but actually it's the Supreme Lord, Mahavishnu, and before him, Narayana and Krishna, who are the cause of all causes. That's why the canto itself is the cosmic manifestation, and within that 5th chapter was specifically the cause of all causes, which introduced us to this subject and elaborated on that in the 6th and 7th chapter. We discussed that. You should be able to relate because it's what we just. And the indication is the Supreme Lord Krishna. The summary of Srimad Bhagavatam in 4 verses, as we have already discussed, is succinct. It means to the point. It's to the point. This Supreme Personality of Godhead in the ultimate issue is confirmed by Brahma in his Brahma Samhita as Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha. So it is concluded in the 3rd canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. How this is so is concluded in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. If you remember, we discussed this also, that a person sees the material cosmic manifestation around him. Okay, so he is bound by it. Everything around him is the material cosmic manifestation. So when he has to understand the Lord, then he starts from where he is and then he gradually goes up. Even the Srimad Bhagavatam itself is designed like that, we can say, where we are talking about the creation aspects of this material creation, and then from gradually we are elevating ourselves to the spiritual world. Right? If you remember, we discussed that from canto by canto, and then finally we reach to the 10th canto, where the Golok Vrindavan, the activities of Golok Vrindavan is being explained, is described. So this creation aspect, okay, the creation of this material world, how the Lord is related to the creation, it concludes in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, after this we will not be speaking much about creation in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th cantos. We will not be speaking again and again about creation. Okay, so the 3rd canto concludes. It concludes that this is the creation where you find yourself in, and this is the Supreme Lord of all this. The support of all this is the Supreme Lord Krishna, Ishvara Parama Krishna, Sachidananda Vigraha. He is the Supreme Source. So it is concluded in the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. The complete subject matter is elaborately explained in the 10th and 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So these topics will again come in the 10th canto, and 11th canto again some aspects of creation will come. Okay, so then it's elaborately explained. The same principles are elaborately explained in the 11th canto. It's just like this, no? Whenever we are writing an essay or when we try to explain something, there's introduction where we introduce the subject matter, then there's explanation of that, and the conclusion is basically the same as the introduction. So because we have explained all this, therefore, then there's a conclusion. So Bhagavatam is like that. We have introduced the subject matter as Sri Krishna, then it's elaborated throughout the whole Bhagavatam, and finally it's concluded with the conclusion of how everything should be understood perfectly. So this 11th canto is therefore quite important because it's kind of a conclusion or summary of the whole Bhagavatam, where every principle that we have already discussed in the previous cantos will come. Okay, your Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, this thing, that thing, so many things. Instructions by Narada Muni to Vasudeva, and Navayogendras, their talks, then Uddhava, where Krishna speaks everything to Uddhava, but in an elaborate manner. We say, no, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada writes it, Bhagavad Gita is there, Srimad Bhagavatam is an elaboration on the topics of Bhagavad Gita. That's why in Srimad Bhagavatam purports, we will find so many Bhagavad Gita verses are quoted. We again go back, in purports, Srila Prabhupada again goes back, again and again to the Bhagavatam, to the Bhagavad Gita verses. It's an elaboration of the topics which Krishna already spoke in Bhagavad Gita. And now he speaks the same subject matter in Uddhava Gita, in the 11th canto. So then it's kind of conclusion to whatever has been discussed in Bhagavatam. So we finish Bhagavad Gita, we study Bhagavad Gita, come to Bhagavatam, and then the complete conclusion again comes in the 11th canto. Okay, so that's why Srila Prabhupada writes, the complete subject matter is elaborately explained in the 10th and 11th cantos of the Srimad Bhagavatam. In the matter of the Manvantaras or reigns of the Manus, such as the Swayambhuva Manvantara and Chakshusha Manvantara, as they are discussed in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Krishna is indicated. Okay, so we will see in the 3rd, 4th how it's that. In the 8th canto, in reference to the Vaivasvata Manvantara, the same subject is explained indirectly, and in the 9th canto, the same purport is there. In the 12th canto, the same is further explained, specifically regarding the different incarnations of the Lord. Thus, it is concluded by studying the complete Srimad Bhagavatam that Lord Sri Krishna is the ultimate Samambonam, or the ultimate source of all energy. And according to the grades of worshippers, the indications of the nomenclature may be differently explained as Narayana, Brahman, Paramatma, etc. Because they are non-different from the Lord. Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti, Shabdyate. They are said like that. But then they are the same perfect absolute truth. They are non-different. So this is the conclusion of the 10 subject matters. So this purport is very apt because in Srimad Bhagavatam, these 10 subject matters is what being discussed, and Prabhupada takes us all throughout the 12 cantos and says everything is in relation to the Supreme Lord Krishna. So he is the ultimate shelter. So all the 9 topics are for understanding Krishna. The 9 cantos are for understanding topics of the 10th canto. So here, living entity is specifically dependent on the Ashraya, the supreme shelter. This is explained in the 8th and 9th text of this canto. So, the individual person possessing different instruments of senses is called the Adhyatmic person. Okay. And the individual controlling deity of the senses is called Adhidaivik, the controlling principle. The embodiment seen on the eyeballs is called the Adhibhautik person. Okay, we will see what this person is Purusha. In this verse, it comes as Purusha, and there's an explanation of why it's mentioned as Purusha. We'll read through the purport. The supreme controlling Samam Bonam is the personality of Godhead in his plenary portion of Paramatma, or the supreme soul, super soul manifestation. Athava bahunaitena kimgyatena tavarjuna vishtabhyaham idam krishnam ekamshena sthito jagat. We'll probably read the whole purport, okay, because it's important. All the controlling deities like Vishnu, Brahma and Shiva are different manifestations of the Paramatma feature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, who exhibits himself in such manners by entering into each and every universe generated from him. Okay. But still, apparently, there are divisions of the controller and controlled. Now, see, this is indicative of the creation. Okay. Now from 8th verse onwards, Shukdev Goswami is going to speak about the universal form and how he creates this material man within the universe, how different senses are created, how different sense objects are created, and how their controlling principle is created. Okay, so this is your 3 principles, Adhibhuta, Adhideva and Adhyatma. We will read through the purport, it will make us understand better. So there are controlling deities like Vishnu, Brahma and Shiva, which are different manifestations of the Paramatma feature of the Supreme Lord. Okay. And then the whole creation itself, there are different other manifestations also, which are also from the potency of the Lord. When Prabhupada quotes this verse, Athva bahunaitena kimgyatena tavajuna vishtabhyaham idam krishnam ekamkshena sthito jagat. He is maintaining this whole universe with just his one amsha. And this also, if we extend this, which means that everything in the material manifestation is working only because of the presence of the Supreme Lord. Because his amsha, his manifestation, his potency is invested in the universe, therefore the universe is functioning as it is functioning. Again, this point it will come in the subsequent verses in this canto itself, in this chapter itself, that without the Supreme Lord's presence, nothing in the material world works. So only because he has invested everything with his potency, the material nature works the way it works. The senses work the way they work. The sense objects are present because of the Lord. And the deities, the controlling deities, are manifestations of the controlling potency of the Lord. So everything is dependent on him. And the whole thing is sustained only by one amsha of his. He maintains everything, he sustains everything just by his one amsha. But although everything is coming from that one amsha of the Lord, but still within that there is variegatedness. Within that there are controlled entities also, and there are controller entities also. Okay. Now, to make it simple, the controlled entities are, say, us, we human beings. The controller entities are the demigods. Although all of us come from the Supreme Lord. So although that one amsha is maintaining everything, but still there is variegatedness. There are controlled entities and there are controller entities also. And both of them will have different bodily features. And these bodily features are distinguished by this Adhibhauta principle. So Adhibhuta is the material body which distinguishes this controller and the controlled. The controlled is the Adhyatma principle who wants to enjoy. Okay. And the controlling principle or the controller is the Adidaiva principle. Is it confusing? A little bit. Maybe we'll read this purport, then it will be clear. For example, in the food controlling department, the controller of food is a person made of the same ingredients as the person who is controlled. Right? They have similar bodies. But then one is controller and the other is controlled. Similarly, each and every individual in the material world is controlled by the higher demigods. So the higher demigods are the controlling deities, the controllers. And each and every individual in the material world is the controlled. Okay, who wants to enjoy sense gratification through his senses. For example, we have our senses, but the senses are controlled by superior controlling deities. Right? So the senses with which the person wants to enjoy, it is the Adhyatma principle. So in subsequent verses, the senses, when the senses are manifest, they are equated with Adhyatma. Okay, because through the senses, you have to see it from the controlling, controlled and the material body perspective. What is being controlled? The senses are controlled. So therefore it's Adhyatma. Who is controlling it? The demigods, the controlling demigods, who are the controllers of the senses. They are the Adidaiva principles because they are the controllers. Correct? Adibhuta is your manifestation of the gross sense organ or the sense object. So there is a sense, there is a sense organ, then there is sense object and the controller of all this. Right? So senses are your Adhyatma because through senses the living entity wants to enjoy and the senses are controlled by the demigods. So Adhyatma is your senses. The sense organ and the sense object is a gross manifestation, right, made up of physical elements. So therefore that's Adibhuta, the material body, and the controlling deity is your Adidaiva principle who has control over all three. So we have Adibhuta, Adidaiva, Adhyatma, and the Supreme Lord is sitting on top of them. Okay. So he is beyond these three. So he is controlling all these three. He is controlling the demigods, he is controlling matter, and is also controlling the senses of living entity. He is Rishikesha. He is the master of all senses. Okay, so this is the principle which will come in the different material manifestation from 10 to 36 almost. From text 10 to text 36, this is what is going to be. Different material manifestations following these principles of Adibhuta, Adideva and Adhyatma and the Supreme Lord who is controlling all these three. It's clear? We'll read this purport. Okay, it will become more clear. Yes?
What's the difference between sense and sense organ?
Sense and sense organ. Just like, see, sense organ is the physical manifestation through which our senses are employed. Just like this, no? When your eyes are closed, say for example you are sleeping, your eyes are closed, but still do you have the tendency to see something? Do you have vision? We do see something, right? And when, even though we are not speaking or nobody is speaking, something keeps going in the mind as if we are hearing something. So
that
senses.
is the activity of mind and thinking.
Mind is the center of all the senses. Okay, so you cannot really differentiate. The differentiation is done in Sankhya philosophy, where the mind is there and then there are different senses. Okay, so these are subtle senses. So actually our sensory perception is subtle, but they are for the working of the body, the manifestation is gross. Okay, just like our senses, each of us have senses, but then based on the differences in body, the sense organs would be different. A dog will have different types of ears, for example, very grossly speaking. So their sense organs are different, manifested of gross matter. But the sense is within the subtle body, which is the mind. Okay, so sense is not our sense organs. These two are distinguished when we speak about Sankhya philosophy. Sense organ is different, which is grossly manifested, but senses are basically very subtle.
So from this passion from which sense organs comes or this sense?
See, sense comes from passion. Okay, when we say knowledge acquiring senses. And the gross manifestation, we can say it comes from ignorance. Ignorance and passion. See, even okay, it'll come in the 10th chapter, but just to answer your question, we have the tendency to walk, correct? We have the tendency to move, we have the tendency to walk. So this tendency to walk is a subtle sense, but it's grossly manifested when our physical legs are manifested, then we can walk. So the gross manifested matter is manifested from ignorance, we know that, dravya. But the subtle sense to do something comes from this passion. Okay, to do something, it comes from passion, the kriya principle, the tendency to do something. This is what this chapter will speak. When the universal form of the Lord wanted to do something, then these things manifested. It may not be clear now. Just if you go 2-3 verses below, you will be able to understand it very clearly. Okay, so just wait for some time. We'll read through this purport to make it very clear. We cannot see without light. Okay, so now we are speaking about our senses, and the senses are controlled by superior controlling deities.
Sense organs.
Senses are controlled by deities. We might have our eyes, but if the controlling deities remove the power, we cannot see. You see people who are blind, not that their organs are not there. The organ is there, but they don't have the vision power. The power is not there. So that sense, the vision, the sensory activity of seeing something is taken from them. People may have hands or legs, but if the hands and legs are paralyzed, they cannot move it. Although the organs is there, but the senses, the power of the senses have been taken back. Sense of working of hand or the knowledge acquiring senses, the potency has been withdrawn by the controlling deities. So although the gross organ is there, it will not work. Correct? So the senses are controlled by the demigods. Okay, is that clear now? The senses are subtle. You just have to understand this principle. Senses are subtle. Sense organ is a gross manifestation so that the senses can be satisfied. Now, when the senses, we say senses come in contact with the sense object, then sense gratification happens, correct? So sense organ is what is coming in contact with the sense object. So sense organ is basically a channel, or it's a via medium. It's a via medium through which the senses are satisfied by coming in contact with the particular sense object. Okay, so it is satisfaction of the sense, and because the mind is also one of the senses, center of the senses. Okay, the senses are connected to the mind. Therefore, the mind becomes happy, or this thinking, feeling of happiness or distress, it happens in the mind because the mind is connected to the senses. And when the senses are agitated, then there is discomfort in the mind. Lots of heat, sweating. We don't like that. The mind is disturbed because of this. Why? Because the senses are connected to that corresponding sense. Or senses are not satisfied. My touch is not satisfied now because of this intense heat or intense cold. So my mind is disturbed. So when we see our mind is disturbed or whatever happens, it's primarily because of our senses not in contact with the appropriate sense object. If it's very comfortable, put AC and all, senses are satisfied now. It's comfortable to concentrate on other things. The mind is not agitated. If such kind of facility is not there, then the senses are not satisfied. They are agitated, and the mind is agitated. To concentrate on one particular thing becomes very difficult. Right? So senses are subtle. Okay, and senses are centered around the mind. And the senses, the medium to interact with the sense object is your sense organ, which is adhibhuta, which is grossly manifested. Sense object itself is gross also, because we want to interact only with material objects here, being in the material world. So that is also gross, that is also adhibhuta principle. The controller of all three, of all these two, basically, adhibhuta and adhyatma is your adhideva. And one who wants to enjoy all this matter through his senses is your adhyatma. So senses are developed from adhyatma. If you remember, adhyatma relates to passion. Senses are related to passion. Okay, sense objects is adhibhuta, sense organs are adhibhuta. So that's ignorance, material manifestation. Adhideva is your controlling principle, the demigods who are situated in sattva guna, who are generated from goodness. Clear? So the senses are controlled by superior controlling deities. We cannot see without light. Correct? We cannot see without light. Although we might have the organ, we cannot see. And even if our sense is working properly, but still we cannot see unless the light is provided by the sun. The supreme controller of light is the sun. The sun god is in the sun planet. And we, the individual human beings or any other living being on this earth, are all controlled by the sun god as far as our eyes are concerned. So our vision is controlled by sun god. Similarly, all the senses we have are controlled by superior demigods. All the senses, knowledge acquiring senses, working senses, everything is controlled by the demigods, who are also as much living entities as we are. Correct? They are also living entities, we are also living entities. But one is controlled and the other is controller.
But that control is also controlled.
He is controlled by the Supreme Lord. Supreme Lord, no, that position is there. We are speaking about the material manifestation now. Okay, so demigods are controlled by the superior controller, supreme controller. But we are speaking about the manifestation of the senses, about the creation principle. So in this creation principles, there are these three things. I think it will come in the 10th verse, I think. Yeah, I think it will come. I think 13th verse it is. We will read that. We will go through one by one. So it will make things very clear actually. But one is empowered while the other is controlled. The demigods are empowered. The controlling superior demigods are empowered. And the other is controlled. The conditioned living entities like us, we are controlled. The controlling living entity is called Adhyatmic person. Sorry, the controlled living entity is called Adhyatmic person. Okay. We are controlled, we are Adhyatmic person. And the controller is called the Adhidevic person. All these positions in the material world are due to different fruitive activities. Correct? Any individual living being can become the sun god or even Brahma or any other god in the upper planetary system by a higher grade of pious work. And similarly, one becomes controlled by the higher demigods by lower grades of fruitive work. So based on his work, he can either go to the heavenly planets, become a controlling demigod, or by lower work, lower type of work, he will become the controlled living entity. So every living entity is subject to the supreme control of the Paramatma, who puts everyone in different positions of the controller and the controlled. So the controlled is the conditioned living entity, the controller is the demigod, but they are all, every living individual entity is subject to supreme control of the Paramatma. So Paramatma is there within the demigods also, within each and every living entity. So he is controlling everybody. That which distinguishes the controller and the controlled, that is the material body, is called the Adibhautik Purusha. Right? The material body of the controlled or the demigods is different. Sorry, not controlled. Controller is different and that of the controlled is different. So that distinguishes the controller and the controlled. So that is called as Adibhautik Purusha, which basically means the gross, the Dravya principle. The body is sometimes called Purusha as confirmed in the Vedas in the following hymn. Sava Esha Purusho Anna Rasamaya. This body is called Anna Rasa embodiment. This body depends on food. The living entity which is embodied does not eat anything. The living entity does not eat anything. However, because the owner is spirit in essence, the material body requires replacement of matter because of the wearing and tearing of the mechanical body. Just like a machine has a wear and tear, this mechanical, our body is also like a machine, yantra. So this also has wear and tear, and we have to take food so that it's replenished. Okay, that our body is healthy. Therefore, the distinction between the individual living entity and the controlling planetary deities is in the Anna Rasamaya body. The sun may have a gigantic body and the man may have a smaller body. But all these visible bodies are made of matter. Nonetheless, the sun god and the individual person, who are related as the controller and the controlled, are equivalent spiritual parts and parcels of the Supreme Being. And it is the Supreme Being who places different parts and parcels in different positions. And thus, the conclusion is that the Supreme Person is the shelter of all. Right? Very clear. Prabhupada has explained so clearly here. So, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur specifically writes here that two verses now show the difference between the Ashraya form situated as Antaryami within all bodies and the individual jivas. So if you remember, our breakup of this chapter 8 and 9 is basically the distinguishing factor between the ashraya, the supreme shelter, and the living entities. So although within the living entities itself there are these demigods, but even these demigods are parts and parcel of the Supreme Lord only. Okay, so the ultimate ashraya is not the demigod. So one should not engage in demigod worship. Although it might seem that they are controlling us in so many ways, but then there is a supreme controller who is as Paramatma within those demigods also is making us, or rather is through them, he gives all facilities for the living entities. So he is a supreme shelter, he is a supreme controller, not the demigods. So demigods are not the ashraya. So people therefore should not foolishly take shelter of the demigods and engage in demigod worship. Neither should they take shelter of any other powerful living entity for that matter. One should take shelter only of the Supreme Lord, who is situated as Paramatma, is maintaining everything. That's why Vishtabhyaham idam krishnam ekamkshena sthito jagat. That one portion of the living entity, one portion of the Supreme Lord itself is superior to all the living entities put together in this material cosmos. So that's why Prabhupada, when he says that this chapter speaks about the Supreme Controller, or that everybody should take to devotional service of the Lord, that is what is being explained in this chapter. This is what it means. By removing all misconceptions that a person might have with respect to demigods, with respect to controlling deities and other things, everything is removed, because on top of all of them is the Supreme Lord. Supreme Lord is transcendental to the material manifestation. Whereas these three, Adidaiva also is within the material realm. The controlling principle is also within the material realm. In the spiritual world, there is no manifestation of Adibhota, Adhyatmana, Adidaiva and all. It is with respect to this material world. Because there, it's only the Lord and His devotees who are one in their consciousness, in principle. And the activities that happen in the spiritual world is all under the shelter of the internal potency of the Lord. So there is no need of any other controller apart from the Supreme Lord Himself. Right? There is no need of demigods there. The way they act in the material world, that's the point. Okay. So there are manifestations of the demigods also there in their pure form, who are all servants of the Lord for pastime sakes, not in the way of controlling the way it is being done in the material world. Clear? Is this clear? Okay. All three of the above mentioned stages of different living entities are interdependent. Okay. Adibhota, Adhyatma and Adideva, they are all interdependent. In the absence of one, other is not understood. But the Supreme Being, as the shelter of the shelter, sees every one of them and is independent of all. Therefore, He is the Supreme Shelter. So this is what we have been discussing. So, Srila Prabhupada gives an example to clear this point as to how everyone is interdependent. All these three principles are interdependent on each other. The sun controls the power of our vision. Like, continue the same example from previous purport. We can see the sun because the sun has its body. And the sunlight is useful only because we have eyes. Without our having eyes, the sunlight is useless. If we don't have eyes, what to do with the sunlight? No? So the demigod, the controlling principle, becomes useless because he has no activity, no function. And without sunlight, the eyes are useless. If there is no sunlight, the eyes are useless. Thus, they are interdependent. Neither of them is independent. Therefore, a natural question arises, who made them interdependent? If none of them are supreme, and they are interdependent on each other, now it means that they are dependent on each of one of them. So there must be someone who is independent of all this, who would have made this thing. Okay, this is perfection of logic. So he says the one who has made such a relationship of interdependence must be ultimately completely independent. Okay, this is an excellent verses for preaching purposes actually. Because for demigods, even those who are engaged in demigod worship and other things, these verses from Bhagavatam can be quoted. And we can say, all these three, you say demigods, but even demigods are dependent on us. You can also quote that verse from Bhagavad Gita, where it said that Devan Bhave Tarina, Paraspara, by their each other, by performing sacrifices, both are satisfied. So one might think how the living entity is satisfying the demigods. But if the living entity does not have his senses, or he does not have the As Prabhupada writes, if he does not have eyes, then what will the demigod do? He is also dependent. So these can be connected in that way, not directly, but definitely these can be connected. So one who has made such a relationship of interdependence must be ultimately completely independent. And as stated in the beginning of Bhagavatam, the ultimate source of all interdependent objects is the completely dependent subject, the Supreme Lord. He is Swashrashrayah, dependent only on himself, and thus he is the supreme shelter of everything. The Supreme Lord is independent. He is not dependent on anybody. He is not dependent on one of these Adhibhautika Adhyatmic principles like this. He is independent completely. And Paramatma and Brahman are subordinate to Bhagavan. So, the individual is under the clutches of the illusory energy, and therefore, although qualitatively one with the super soul, he is under the illusion of identifying himself with matter. To get out of the illusory conception of actual life, the individual soul has to depend on the super soul to be recognized as one with him. So one cannot attain liberation by worshipping the demigods. Although they are the controlling deities, still one cannot attain liberation. He has to be within this material world. Because they are also dependent, the interdependence is there. So supreme shelter is the super soul. The Srila Prabhupada speaks how the Supreme Lord never forgets or leaves his transcendental position, but the Jivatma can. So the propaganda of the identity of cosmic consciousness with the consciousness of the individual living entities is completely misleading, because even such a person or individual soul as Arjuna could not remember his past deeds, although he is always with the Lord. Correct? The Supreme Lord is completely independent. His knowledge, his forgetfulness, from me comes knowledge, forgetfulness and Vedesha sarve rahameva vidya vedanta krit veda vidya pachaham. This is what he's saying, that the Lord never forgets anything, but the living entity forgets, because he is interdependent, he is dependent on the Lord. So now, see, this is the next section, okay. From 10 to 35, we have elements of creation, and they are also dependent on the independent Supreme Lord. So this is an elaboration of the dependence of the Adhibhuta Adhyatmana Adhideva principle on the Supreme Lord with respect to creation. So we are going to see how the universal form creates or manifests all the material aspects. After separating the different universes, the gigantic universal form of the Lord, Mahavishnu, which came out of the causal ocean, the place of appearance for the first Purusha Avatara, entered into each of the separate universes, desiring to lie on the created transcendental water, Garbhodaka. So the Mahavishnu expands himself as Garbhodaksha Vishnu. So the Supreme Lord and his expansions are fully independent, and their pastimes are perfect. So it does not mean that because Garbhodaksha Vishnu manifested from Mahavishnu, and Mahavishnu also manifests the inferior material ingredients, therefore Garbhodaksha Vishnu is also somewhat inferior only. No. This expansion of the Lord has the same potency. He is transcendental, and his pastimes are completely perfect. So one should not say because Mahavishnu Pradhana is there, which is the ingredient energy, ingredient potency is also coming from Mahavishnu only, and Garbhodaksha Vishnu is expanding from Mahavishnu. So maybe Garbhodaksha Vishnu is also materially, he has material body. We also hear from Shastra Garbhodaksha Vishnu created as, he manifested his universal form. He is used, or he only does the material creation. So therefore he also has material body, just like the impersonalists would say. They'll make this logic. Okay, they'll make this logic. They'll say because Narayana is there, fine, who cannot be understood. That's okay. It's avyakta, it's anirvachaniya. But the material manifestation of the Lord takes this material form for the purpose of creation, for the purpose of maintenance, for the purpose of destruction. So the Lord also has material form only. Those who say this, they are all Mayavadis. Correct? They are called Mayavadis because they think the Lord's form is Maya. So one might say that the universal form is made up of material ingredients, so therefore the Lord's form itself is matter, which is Maya. But in Srimad Bhagavatam, specifically in this chapter, these misconceptions are removed. The form of the Lord is always transcendental, it is always spiritual. Garbhodaksha Vishnu is spiritual. His activities are completely spiritual. and his pastimes are perfect. Okay. Whatever he does with respect to the material nature, it is only, you can say, manipulating of his material energy. Okay. And that's how the material creation is made. The Lord does not get transformed into matter. Garbhodakshaya Vishnu does not become the universal form. Okay, he does not become the universal form. The Lord does not have a material body. His body is transcendental. Okay, so this is kind of maybe you can say you have to understand it from a principal point of view, a subtle point of view, or a symbolic point of view. Because the creation is such that it looks that the Lord is directly interacting with the material energy. But actually the Lord does not interact with material energy. By His will, everything is taken care of. Okay, so even when He is manifesting the material elements, when the activities of Sarga is happening, it is happening by the will of the Lord. By His desire itself it happens. Not that He has to get His hands dirty, so to speak. Okay, He does not have to work with the material energy and do something. It all happens by His desire. And this we will see. Even in terms of the universal form, when the universal form wanted to eat, then the mouth is manifested, it is said. Right? When he wants to manifest hunger and thirst, then by his desire it manifests. And then to satisfy the hunger and thirst, then the mouth is manifested. So all the manifestation also happens because of the desire of the original personality of God, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. So they are non-different from the original form of the Lord. So this should be clear. The Supreme Lord Shri Krishna and his plenary portions and extensions of plenary portions are not different from one another, and thus the supreme independence is in each and every one of them. So they are not dependent. We should not say Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is dependent on Mahavishnu. They are expansions. They are supremely independent on their own right. Okay, so there is no competition between them. That Mahavishnu is controlling Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. That does not work. It's not like that. All of them are completely independent. They are, we are speaking about the Supreme Lord, they have their different functions, but it's all one, in the sense it's all for one particular purpose. So expansions of the Lord do not deviate from their purposes. Okay, it's one particular purpose. In order to prove this, Shukdev Goswami, as promised to King Parikshit, describes herein the independence of the Purusha Avatara, personality of Godhead, even in the sphere of the material creation. So this one question was asked by Parikshit Maharaj in the 8th chapter, that although the Lord is engaged in creation, but still he remains independent. Can you please explain that? Can you please talk about it? And then he also asked to explain the universal form of the Lord in more elaborate manner. So both these questions are answered in this chapter. So because the Lord's pastimes are transcendental, they are very conducive to the hearers for self-realization in the field of devotional service. And one may argue, why not relish the transcendental Leela of the Lord as exhibited in the land of Mathura and Vrindavan, which are sweeter than anything in the world? So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur replies, the pastimes of the Lord in Vrindavan are meant for advanced devotees. For neophyte devotees, they will misunderstand. So therefore, for them, the Lord's pastime in the material sphere related to creation, maintenance and destruction are verily relishable for them. So that is why the first canto has the creation also. Right there in 3rd chapter itself, right at the start of Bhagavatam, establishing the Bhagavatam is topmost priority. Okay, the position of Srimad Bhagavatam is established in the 1st and 2nd chapter. 3rd chapter, by the end, we are speaking about creation. Okay, and then there are pastimes of the Lord are mentioned and how the Srimad Bhagavatam came to be spoken. So in 2nd canto, Shukdev Goswami does not speak about any Leela of the Lord. There is no Leela in 2nd canto. There is only creation aspect. Because, and this is what Shukdev Goswami starts to speak to Parikshit Maharaj. Even though Parikshit Maharaj is in the highest level of pure devotional service, he is eligible to listen to 10th canto, Parikshit Maharaj, right from the start, obviously. But Shukdev Goswami, following the standard of reciting the pastimes of the Lord, starts with creation from the universal form, so that materialistic devotees who are there, they can relate to the universal form of the Lord. So first 3 chapters his universal form, this discussion about Paramatma. Although it's mentioned that Supreme Lord is beyond these, but still the focus or the subject matter, we can say, is the universal form or the Paramatma feature of the Lord. Then there's creation aspect, where again the universal form of the Lord comes and different principles of creation are mentioned. So this is because for one who's starting his process in devotional service, for them these subject matters are important to understand. Prabhupada, it's very relishable how the Lord creates by his different potencies. And through this process, all the misconceptions are also removed about the transcendental nature of Krishna. So that way, purification happens. Purification means all misconceptions are removed. Correct? All the granthi, all the knots in the heart are removed. These knots can be material knots, which basically manifest as misconceptions in our devotional service. So the Hridaya Granthis, all these Hridaya Granthis, Chidyante Sarva Samshaya, so all these misconceptions and doubts are also removed by hearing these pastimes of the Lord. So that's why these things are important. That's why we are discussing all this. One should not be amazed by the mechanical arrangement of the complicated engine or dynamo, but one should praise the engineer who creates such a wonderful working machine. So therefore, one should praise the Lord, not the material manifestation. That is why creation is never discussed without connection to the Lord. This is where the Sankhya philosophers, the mundane Sankhya philosophers, Nyayikas, the Vaisheshikas, other philosophers, the Shad Darshanas are there. No? Apart from Vedanta philosophy, all the other five, they do not take it back to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to Krishna, to the Bhagavan feature. They start from the intermediate position and bring it to the material condition. They will stop at a particular point. So it's incomplete. So they do not praise the Supreme Lord who is responsible for all this. So although God controls the physical laws, He isn't one among us. So one should not take it for granted that the physical laws are independent without any metaphysical control, because Supreme Lord is controlling it. Fine, it's a long purport. You can read it, and if you have any questions, you can ask later probably. So Sri Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says that the difference between the Jiva and the Lord has been established through the 10 characteristics of the Mahapurana, and thus bhakti to the Lord has been hinted as a deliverance of the Jiva from the world. That the Supreme Being, as the shelter of the shelter, sees every one of them and is independent of all. Therefore, He is the Supreme Shelter. Therefore, one should take shelter of Him. One who is the Supreme Shelter, it's obvious that you should go and take shelter of Him, not take shelter of any other person, controlled or controller. So this is an answer to the questions which Parikshit Maharaj asks from in 2.8.11. Okay. And Shukdev Goswami promises to speak about this in the last verse of the previous chapter also, 2.9.46. That Supreme Person is not impersonal and therefore is distinctively a Nara or a person. So this Lord, it's established. Now we are going to speak about creation. We'll probably speak about universal form also. But one must think that one must understand is that Supreme Person is not impersonal. Therefore, and this is actually, it's interesting because this particular point, the Supreme Person is not impersonal, is not there in the verse. It's not there in the text at all. If you read the text, it's Tas avatsit sva srishtasu sahasram parivatsaran. So Garbhodaksha Vishnu lied on Garbhodaka ocean for 1,000 years. Right? Sahasram parivatsaran. Correct? Sahasram, 1,000 parivatsaran, years of his measurement. So verse does not speak about his impersonal feature. But Prabhupada makes this point to clear all misconception that might arise in the due course of this chapter. Okay, for material creation, the Lord is not taking impersonal form. Garbhodaksha Vishnu is not impersonal, although it would seem that he is manifesting the universal form from his own body. We will see that. Impersonalists basically have these two misconceptions. One is that the Lord does not have any form, any transcendental form, and that for the purpose of creation, Brahman manifests as the universal form. Okay, so both are signifying the impersonalism. So to remove that misconception, Prabhupada writes this here, right at the start. He is Nara, right? Tena Narayano Nama. Nara, who lies in the water, is called as Narayana. Therefore, the transcendental water created from the Supreme Nara is known as Nara. And because he lies down on that water, he is known as Narayana. So, this word Nara comes, right? So, Prabhupada makes this point that the Supreme Person is not impersonal. Skipping completely that he lied down for 1000 years of his measurement in the Bhagavatam. But he quotes that in the next verse, we will see. One should definitely know that all material ingredients, activities, time and modes, and the living entities who are meant to enjoy them exist by his mercy only. And as soon as he does not care for them, everything becomes non-existent. So the potency, we discussed this point, this was that verse which I was referring to. The potency of everything materially manifested comes from the Lord, from Garbhodaksha Vishnu. If he removes, if he does not care for them, everything becomes non-existent. So even Lord Brahma cannot create anything without these things are invested with the potency by the Lord. Till Garbhodaksha Vishnu does his creation, Lord Brahma does not create. He cannot create. He does not know how to create. Unless and until there are ingredients properly manifested and a template or a framework or a plan which is given to Lord Brahma, he cannot execute anything. So therefore, Garbhodaksha Vishnu is the shelter. Supreme Lord is the shelter. So material ingredients do not work. They become non-existent. Activities, they become non-existent. Time and modes, they also are non-existent. And the living entities who are meant to enjoy them all, they also are, you can say, non-existent. Non-existent means they are not manifesting their activities. They are not manifested. They are on the body of Garbhodaksha Vishnu. And if the Lord desires, just to make matters very clear, the Lord desires that he wants to wind up the creation, just by that one thought, everybody would die. The whole pralaya will come, everything would go down to ashes. That's it. Just by his one wish. So the Lord, this is called total independence. Just by his will, everything is created. Just by his will, everything can be destroyed within one single moment. So if Krishna wants to kill somebody, he can kill just by thinking. But then just to engage in his pastime, so that his glories are being spoken by the pure devotees, he comes and performs his pastimes. Apparently being hit. So this purport is basically an analysis of the enjoying spirit of the living entity. And it's very interesting because it's mentioned that the enjoyment of the living entity also exists only by the mercy of the Lord. So even those people who think or who want to engage in sense gratification, they can do sense gratification only when the Lord desires. Krishna desires, okay, I give you permission to do sense gratification, they can do. Otherwise, no, they cannot. They want to lord it over the material nature. And because the Lord allows them to lord it over the material nature, they are able to lord it over the material nature. Okay. So jivas are mentioned in Bhagavad Gita as Lord's superior nature. And also it is mentioned in Vishnu Purana. So the living entities are never the Purushas or the factual enjoyers. But if you see, we discussed about is Adibhautik Purusha, Adhyatma Purusha and Adidaiva Purusha. And I think Acharya Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, because the tendency to enjoy matter is there, therefore this Adibhuta or Adhyatma is also called as Adhyatmika Purusha. Because the tendency to enjoy is there on the part of living entity. Controlling living entities, the demigods, also are called as Adidaiva Purusha. So Purusha is when there is this tendency to enjoy this material world. So therefore they are addressed as Purushas in the 8th verse of this chapter. The spirit of enjoyment by the living entity in the material world is false. In the material world, the spirit of enjoyment by dint of their own actions gradually fades by the law of nature. And thus the illusory energy dictates in the ears of the conditioned soul that they should become one with the Lord. Material sense gratification frustrates. Right? So, by the dint of their own actions, by karma, gradually they give up the tendency to enjoy. But now they want to become one with the Lord. This is impersonalism, the last snare of Maya. Yeah, this is the last snare of the illusory energy. When the last illusion is also cleared out by the mercy of the Lord, the living entity becomes reinstated in its original position and thus becomes actually liberated. Right? Muktiritva nidharupa swarupena vyavastiti. From this attainment of liberation from the material clutches, the Lord creates the material world, maintains it for some time, and for. So for this attainment of liberation only, so again the same thing, same purpose. For the purpose of attainment of liberation, the Lord creates the material world, maintains it for some time, and then again annihilates it by His will. The living entities are therefore completely dependent on the mercy of the Lord. And all their so-called enjoyments by scientific improvement are crushed into dust when the Lord desires. Right? So it's useless basically. The whole endeavor, the whole material endeavor is completely useless. And the Lord, just like this example, the father allows the child to play on the beach. He creates grand castles. And then that's it. One wave comes in the night, destroys everything. That's it. Useless, no? It just puts everything into perspective. All our material desires and activities are actually a grand illusion, because there's no point. They're all going to get destroyed anyways. Okay, so if you have any questions on these principles that we discussed today, it would be better if we clear that now itself, so that in next session we can move faster. So do you have any questions? Yes.
Yes, why the Lord does annihilation of the creation? Because the purpose of creation is that these living entities can go there.
That's a good question. Why does He have to annihilate?
Maybe it can continue so that living entities can be liberated from.
Yeah, that's a good question. But I don't have a direct answer for that. Why does He have to annihilate? One thing is, it is, you can say it's one of His pastimes of creation, maintenance and destruction. Destruction is also one of His pastimes. He wants to do it, so He does it. Because being supremely independent, He could do that also. No destruction, only creation and maintenance. Yeah, I think He desires to annihilate also. So you have your understanding, yes. Yes.
I heard that Ananda Shesh,
He becomes angry.
he becomes angry because this
Yes, I also know that it actually comes in the 5th canto. In 5th canto it's mentioned that Anantashesh becomes very angry because the living entities are not taking up devotional service, and that anger he destroys. Which we can say is the pastime of the Lord. If He really wants, He can continue. But other reasons I'm not specifically aware of. But maybe it can be so that He Himself wants to enjoy the pastime of taking rest. So He annihilates.
Even in Brahma's lifetime.
Brahma's lifetime is also there. Brahma should not live more than 100 years, not that he perpetually lives. But those things can be adjusted by the Lord if He desires. Okay, everything can be adjusted by Krishna, by the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, by Mahavishnu, everything can be adjusted. The only perfect answer which I can think of is the Lord wants to enjoy the pastime of slumber, of His mystic sleep. So for that purpose He annihilates. Actually this point comes in this chapter itself. Now just when we speak about this slumber, I don't know this, this verse. Somewhere I read that this is the maintenance. This is 42 is maintenance, 43 is destruction.
About slumber or something?
Yeah, that the Lord destroys so that, I think it's in the purport. It's in the purport. Somewhere in the purport. Yeah, it is mentioned that when the Lord desires to go to sleep, then Lord Brahma also enters into his body. Okay, Nirodha. When we're discussing about Nirodha, I think it's there in the first few verses, 6th verse maybe.
There is slumber.
Yes.
Translation also.
So, translation itself. Yes. The merging of the living entity along with the mystic lying down of Mahavishnu is called mind of Mahavishnu. The question is this. Anyways, I don't know. Somehow I read it. Somewhere I read it. So this is The point is that when the Lord wants to go to sleep, then the whole cosmic manifestation is withdrawn within him. And when Mahavishnu is breathing, then again it's withdrawn into him. So that is how it's the Lord's pastime, you can say. His pastimes are various, are varied. When he wants to be active, he remains active. When he wants to go to mystic sleep, yoga nidra, then the destruction happens. Okay. Anything else? Nothing. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki,
Jai.
Gaur Premanand.